Welcome to Understanding the Masculine Psyche. If you're watching this, you're probably a man who wants to be a better version of himself. Maybe you are struggling with taking action. Maybe you're stuck in analysis paralysis. You overthink too much. You have unhealthy behaviors that you do. You're trying to get stuff done, but it's a struggle uphill every single day. Or maybe you're really disconnected in your relationships. Maybe you're dating somebody and there seems to be a divide or a gap or a distance that you're feeling in your relationships. Well, through this video, I'm going to help you basically fix all that. And if you're a woman watching this, you're probably wanting to not date unhealthy, toxic men and date better men. So this will be a video for you to better understand the masculine psyche and focus on attracting the right type of men. So let's get started. This is a graph that I have created over the past 6 years of my life studying Jungian psychology. Technically, I've been studying psychology since I was 15 years old, which would be 16 years now. I've read over 355 books and audiobooks over the past 11 years, and a majority of them are over the human mind. And I figured out a lot of stuff. So let's get into it. What we're looking at here is not technically a map of the psyche. This is a map of archetypes that connect or influence the psyche. So what are archetypes? You've probably heard of them, maybe Briggs-Myers tests like INTJ and stuff like that. Archetypes are actually, they were pioneered in the early 1930s from Carl Jung. And essentially, he spent his entire life studying myths and fables and stories and unconscious projections from people's psyches and art and literature to understand what are the common patterns. Like, is there like a blueprint or this undercurrent that goes through the psyche that people can attach to or understand or use to reverse engineer themselves? And the answer is yes. And in fact, I can give you an example. A client that I'm working with right now, upon getting started with him, we discovered that he had what's called a lavish prince archetype. He was unconsciously living out the pattern of a lavish prince. And one of the things that I like about archetypes is it's very easy to explain what I'm talking about. I don't even have to explain it. Like, he's a lavish prince. You can just imagine what that is and the problems that occur with that. So he was spending a lot of money. He was making a lot of money. He's in his early 20s, making $10,000 to $20,000 a month. And every dollar in was immediately going out. It was just disappearing. And upon working with him, he told me that he wants to be more responsible. He wants to build a future. He wants to buy a house for his mom. He wants to buy his own house. I'm like, okay, well, in order for you to do that, we need to develop the king psychology, the king archetype. So every dollar that the lavish prince spends is a dollar wasted on the foundation of your kingdom. This is why I love archetypes, because you can very concisely and quickly depict extremely complex, behaviors and psychology, because you can really get into the weeds with the prince or the king, and we will a little bit in this video. But they're extremely useful for diagnostic and understanding where you're struggling in your life, or if you're a woman, the type of man you're attracting can inversely tell you about yourself, and vice versa. For every man watching this, when I do a video on the feminine psyche, you'll see the type of women that you're attracted to, and maybe that's not healthy. Maybe those type of women aren't long-term partner quality. So we can understand the feminine psyche and reverse engineer that. So let's get started. First, to look at it just in left to right, up and down, what we're looking at is on the left side, I usually call it immature masculinity, but I don't like that word because it denotes that it's bad or that it's underdeveloped. But all of these archetypes do play a critical role in the psyche. So from left to right, we can kind of look at it as acquiring power and bearing responsibility. So the biggest difference between a prince and a king is selfless service. Like if we're talking about the perfect king, the divine king, he's benevolent. He's a servant king. He serves the people around him. He serves his kingdom. He loves his kingdom. He takes care of everyone inside of that kingdom. The prince, on the other hand, he's ego-driven. And you'll see this in young men. Usually it's supposed to stop around 30, 35 years old. But these are men that they're trying to prove themselves. They're always doing stuff. They're showing off. They're trying to make money. They're trying to build their ego to be solid and strong and make a mark in the world and, show who they are. And that's not a bad thing. Everyone should do that. Men should do that. But ultimately, the prince is only concerned with his ego and what he wants. He does not want responsibility, and he does not want to take care of other people. So that's the two biggest archetypes that we're going to look at in this video is the prince and the king. And from left to right, you have ego service to selfless service. Now, up to down, you have what's called logos and eros. And I have a description here and legends for you to understand this stuff. Logos is the principal structure of differentiation. Structure, meaning, and making things through clarity and reason. It is logic. It's the frontal cortex in neuroscience. So logos is strategy, it's tactics, it's knowledge, it's the rational masculine energy. So in Jungian psychology, he uses a lot of words from Greek, and one of those words is libido, and not libido in the sexual sense, but libido as life force, as energy. And you can transmute your life force. Like every day you wake up and you have a certain amount of energy that you expel every single day. And some of it goes into your career, some of it goes into your relationship, some of it goes into doing whatever you want to do for fun. But that's life force, that's libido. And if you channel libido through the masculine, through strategy and logic, you are channeling it through logos. But if you channel it through eros, you're channeling that life force through connection, through relatedness, through psychological boundaries, through feeling and value. You're building relationships. It is the feminine energy of the psyche. And both men and women have masculine and feminine. There's actually an unconscious feminine inside of every man, which is called the animus, which we will get to in a minute. This is basically the type of women that you're attracted to. This is the ideal unconscious image of the feminine. So like when you meet a woman who's really beautiful and you just have like this crazy pull towards her, but it's completely unconscious. There's no rationale to it. Like you don't even know her name yet. It makes no sense. That's the animus, but we'll get to that in a second. So that's that. Up to down, left to right, we have acquiring power, ego versus responsibility, and a benevolent king or a servant king. And then we have logos, eros. At the top side, we have the most logos. So the immature masculine would be the precarious child, and the mature masculine would be the magician. So the precarious child is just the person who's super interested in learning stuff all the time. They cannot stop consuming information, and that's to feed their ego to feel intelligent and feel smart through power and knowledge. The downside, though, of the precarious child is, ladies, have you ever dated a man who was really smart but didn't do shit with it? Or guys, have you ever had a friend who was really intelligent and he just doesn't fucking do anything with it? That's the precarious child. That's the downside of the precarious child. So the mature side is the magician. This is Merlin, classically, or through myth, King Arthur, Merlin, Knights of the Round Table. A lot of fables and myths. I will be doing videos on YouTube over a lot of breaking down the psychology of mythology. In fact, I'm working on a video right now over Maleficent, and it's the story of when femininity is wounded by weak masculinity. I'm going to produce that video very soon, probably this week. But if you want to check that out, you can click on my YouTube link here and subscribe and follow, because if you're into this stuff, it's coming. And I'm going to be doing a lot of videos on that. But you can use those stories to really understand this stuff. Anyways, Merlin, the magician, he serves the king. He serves a higher power. And you'll see this commonality on the right side of the psyche, selfless service. It's men that have a creed, they have a duty, they have a responsibility, they have an internal or sometimes external. They serve their government, they serve a company or corporation, they serve a hierarchical masculine structure. And the magician deploys his knowledge in service to that structure. Below that, with less logos, we have the hero and the warrior. I love the story of Achilles and Hector in Troy. If you've ever seen the movie Troy, it's a perfect depiction of these two archetypes. But a little trick question real quick, if you have seen that movie and you like it, is, do you think Achilles is a hero or a warrior? I'll let you just think about that for a second. I won't tell you what these two are, but most people might think he's a warrior. But once I describe the difference, you'll understand. So first off, ego, serving yourself or serving your city. When Achilles and Hector fight, who is serving? What are they serving? What is Achilles serving? What is Hector serving? Well, if you don't know the story, essentially Achilles was a demigod. It was prophesied that his mother was a god, and he was the best warrior in all of time. And in fact, Mike Tyson, if you ever watched any of his interviews, he actually studied Achilles religiously to understand the fighter. So here's the thing. Achilles, though, hated his king, Agamemnon. He didn't give a shit about his people or his military, soldiers and stuff. Like, he didn't care about any of that. He only cared about his own glory. His only goal in life was to die gloriously in battle so that he will be remembered forever. That's hero. That's ego feeding. In real life, you see this as guys with dick measuring contests. Anytime two guys get into a fucking pissing contest, that's ego. That's the hero trying to prove himself. So again, the prince, the precarious child, the hero, they're all geared around proving themselves. They have to prove that they're worthy of something. That's a very important note there that we're going to come back to when we get into the unconscious anima and Eros. Because there's a key distinction, ladies, if you're watching this, there's a key distinction psychologically between a man operating predominantly in the prince and the king, and it's him having to prove himself. So on the other side, we have the warrior. We have the divine warrior, which lives to a creed, lives to a motto. This is Knights of the Round Table. This is Hector. So Hector went out to battle. So in the story of Troy, Agamemnon and Achilles and the army lands on the beach, and they build a camp, and then they're attacking and fighting and trying to get into the city. But the city's walls are too strong, and it comes to a point where Achilles challenges Hector to a battle, to a fight to the death. And whoever wins will win the war. Like, they'll just call off the war. All these men don't have to die. And Agamemnon fucking plays Achilles a little bit of empathy to like manipulate him into fighting Hector, because Achilles doesn't really care. And eventually Hector comes out of the wall and they have a battle. Hector dies. And what's interesting is, from an archetypical lens, both the hero and the warrior in the story of Troy in the Iliad, they both die by their own faults. So Achilles, a god warrior, a demigod warrior, dies from an arrow in his foot. So it's called the Achilles heel because Achilles died from taking an arrow to the heel. Like, what kind of demigod dies to a fucking scratch on their heel? And it's a Greek tragedy of what happens when somebody is possessed by archetypes. In the Greek culture and Greek mythology, they really understood this stuff. They often use these gods as ways to explain how someone is. So if they saw someone embodying the Achilles, like, they would actually say, this is a man of Achilles, like, he serves Achilles. Like, you serve a certain god in Greek or in Greek culture, and you're embodying that archetype. But the downside of these archetypes is there are dark sides that come forth, and we will get into that stuff. So that's the hero, the warrior. And the other Greek tragedy here that nobody really pays attention to is Hector. Hector died from his selflessness. If he was a little more egotistical, he might have lived, or he might have survived longer. And vice versa, if Achilles was a little less egotistical and a little more selfless, he might not have died. I think he was actually, in the movie, they portray him as like trying to save the woman. I don't know. I haven't read the Iliad, but I don't know if that's completely accurate, but he died egotistically trying to get to what he wanted, which was the woman that he was protecting, which can be seen as a selfless act a little bit, but ultimately he's extremely egotistical. So Achilles, the hero, died from his ego. The warrior, Hector, died from selflessness. Both are a Greek tragedy. Now, lastly, we have the oedipal child and the grail knight. And this is a very complex one and very interesting one, and it's one of the most screwed up ones in our culture today. So, the oedipal child. And you'll also note that there's also left side and right side here. We have tyrant prince and weakling prince. So each archetype also has an inflated ego and a deflated ego. Before we get into the oedipal child, I'll run you through them. So the hero, in his fullness, he is proving himself. He's powerful. But he's not a bully. He's not sadistically doing things to people for his own, he's not extreme ego. He's still driven by like a desire to prove himself, but it's not in a twisted way. The other end is the coward. And then on this side, for the precarious child, you have the know-it-all trickster, somebody who's really, really smart and like manipulates people. And then on the other side, you have the dummy. And if you take all of the immature archetypes on their inflated egos, you actually get the narcissist. So up here, you can pause this if you want to read the narcissist. But that's essentially what a narcissist is. He's an inflated, unconscious drive towards extreme egotism. On the other side, you have Dracula, mythologically. But Dracula, essentially, on the masculine or the mature side or the selfless side, he is the detached manipulator versus the denied innocent one, the sadist versus the masochist, the tyrant versus the weakling, and the spiritual warrior versus the apathetic to his divinity. And that'll make more sense when we get to Grail Knight and oedipal child. But if you take all of the inflated egos here, you get Dracula, which is essentially an all-powerful, and the difference here is sovereignty. So he's all-powerful and sovereign, but he also is attached to a higher calling, a creed. And in Dracula, he's cursed. So the curse is the like creed that he's basically forced into that creed. But you'll see this in real life with basically tyrannical crusaders. You know, World War II, if you study some of the mad scientists and people doing experimentations on the Axis side, you get Draculas. You get extremely twisted. And in their mind, and this is the important point here, those types of men, if you talk to them, they actually believe in what they're saying. They actually believe that they're doing good. And this is the saying that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Very, very true in this context. So we'll get to God as well as the Prince of Fantasia, or the devil as another name, but the oedipal child. So the oedipal child is essentially ego that is attached to the approval of femininity. That's the best way to put it. He's attached, his sense of self, his sense of identity, his ego is beholden to femininity. It's beholden to his mother. It's beholden to his girlfriend. It's beholden to all women. And you'll see this in young men that are in the dating scene. And this is why rejection is an extremely painful, it's one of the most painful psychological experiences for men and women, is because when a man who is driven by ego and he's very in his prince and he's not detached from femininity, when he is rejected by a woman, like let's say he's at a bar or something, or he's out somewhere and he approaches a girl and he gets rejected. We all have seen those videos on TikTok and stuff where like a guy freaks out, or he's an asshole, or he throws a drink at her, or he like cusses her out. That's a prince. That's an oedipal child who is, his self-worth is dependent on the feminine, essentially. So when you take all of the deflated egos of the left side, the immature masculinity, you essentially get a Peter Pan. I don't need to, any women that are watching this, that you know what a Peter Pan man is. You probably dated one, and you probably dated men that you felt more like his mother than a partner. Like he was not in that relationship to be a king and to lead you and to build a kingdom with you in a future. He was there because he liked you and you made him feel good and he got a lot of things from you. So a Peter Pan essentially never wants to grow up. And the story of Peter Pan is he just never wants to not be a child. And there's unfortunately a lot of men that are like that. And there's a lot of men who are not, they're not independent of feminine approval. So on the opposite side, now you see where we're going with this, the Grail Knight. So the Grail Knight is a very interesting one. The Grail Knight, he desires connection with the feminine without possession. That's the key there. He desires connection, usually to a higher calling, to a purpose. So he might desire connection, or technically Eros. So this is also desiring emotional intelligence, because on the unconscious level, every man has an unconscious feminine in him, the animus, and you can actually map where a man is psychologically developed based on the type of woman that he's attracted to. So obviously the oedipal child is going to be attracted to a princess or a mother. A princess is the inverse of the immature masculine or acquiring power, which is she also doesn't want responsibility. She's also proving herself, proving her value, and so forth. So they're going to usually attract each other. Or in the middle ground, you'll have men that are in the process of developing fully into their own individuality. And in Jungian psychology, this is called the process of individuation. So if you want to look this up, the process of individuation is the lifelong psychological evolution of a human being. And when someone starts this, it's usually around the age of 28, unless they've been taught this in some way or they have someone guiding. And in this phase of their life, when they're starting to look back into their past and understand their unconscious patterns, understand maybe their trauma or things that they went through, they're trying to reflect on things, they're trying to integrate, they're trying to develop wisdom from the things that they used to do in their past, and they're trying to not repeat the same patterns. That is when you get into men who are starting to disconnect from the feminine. They're starting to move towards a more selfless life and developing deeper purpose in their life, essentially. And that's really what the Grail Knight is doing, is the Grail Knight is seeking purpose. And the reason that the Grail Knight is connected to Eros and femininity and relationships is because you can't really develop a purpose without relationship. Like if this is Castaway and you're Tom Hanks on a island, you're going to have a lot of psychological issues. And he did, because there's no connection there. There's no people. You have to have people and you have to have relationships to define your purpose. And what the Grail Knight does is he, instead of saying, I want a relationship or I want a woman to date because I'm lonely, he'll say, I want to build a life for myself. I want to build my own kingdom, and I want to find a queen who can serve with me. We can build something together. And if she is awesome, that's great. But my focus is not just everything about my woman. I'm not trying to get into a codependent relationship where we both just use each other. I'm looking for something much deeper. And that's where the Grail Knight comes into. And he's seeking for depth. And the key with the Grail Knight is he's kind of the initiation into all of this stuff. So if you're watching this as a man right now, you are in that realm. You're in that mode a little bit. And essentially, I'll make another video and I'll probably break down like the story of the Grail or the Holy Grail. There's a really great book called, what is it called? It's about the wild man. One sec, let me see what that was called. It's a great book. It's called Iron John by Robert Bly, and it's a phenomenal story over a prince becoming a king and all of these psychological things that occur here. But the Grail is essentially a holy quest. It is your divine quest in life. It's the ultimate question of like, who am I and like, who am I supposed to be? So importantly, some of the things to know about the Grail Knight is he bears the Grail. He knows his duty. He knows his direction in life and where he's going, but he never becomes it. He never gets possessed by it. And possessed by it in this context is very similar to Hector and Achilles. Achilles was possessed essentially by the archetype of the hero, and he fell because of that. And Hector, vice versa, was possessed by the warrior, the completely selfless man who ended up dying because of that. And there's a lot more, dark sides that come with this stuff, but we'll cover that. So he serves Eros under a vow, and this is really important. He will have an internal focal point and calibration towards femininity. He will not be dependent on it. He doesn't need approval from other women. He knows what his value is, and he knows where he's going in life. And he knows that just by the mere fact of growing himself, he will attract the right type of women. And inversely, you'll also repel the wrong type of women. And he's not really concerned with it. So orientation towards the divine without identifying with it. And this is where we get into God. God has a really interesting dynamic here in psychology. And this is one of the reasons why I developed this framework, because there's a lot of psychological frameworks, but almost none of them talk about the concept of God. And before you think I'm going to start like Bible thumping here, I was not religious until like 8 months ago, and I'm still reading the Bible and getting through it, and I don't know anything about like Christianity other than the basics. So this is not going to be a Bible thumping thing. It's going to be a psychological interpretation of the importance of God, or like the function of God. So like in this type of psychology, it's not about yes or no, or this is true or this is false. It's about understanding the function. What is the purpose? How does it serve the psyche in my development? So you'll notice that when men start to move into a more king psychology, they will often start seeking God. A lot of men will connect with God. And actually, Carl Jung argued that if you are someone who is a truth seeker, you're a seeker of truth, you will inevitably encounter God in some way internally. So that's what we're going to talk about. This is God. Essentially, he is the king. He is the divine sovereign. He's unshakable. He's a generator of existence. He does not rule through control, unless, Old Testament, but being through a source of divine order and law. He does not drain his kingdom of life like the tyrant, and he is the infinite source of which all life is blessing and flow. And blessing is a key word too with the king. A benevolent king blesses everything he touches. He is benevolent. Warrior, the sacred destroyer and creator. He wields the absolute power of the warrior, but not for personal pleasure like the sadist. His acts of destruction, the flood and the fire, are always in service of a divine cosmic purpose, to cleanse, to purify, to make way for the new creation. Important too here in this psychology, we're not necessarily talking about real life. We're actually talking about an individual psyche. So flood and fire is symbolically, psychologically, cleansing your own psyche. So hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going with this. The magician, logos, divine architect, he is the ultimate magician, the source of all knowledge and cosmic law. He does not manipulate reality for his own end like the detached manipulator. His very words are reality. Let there be light. His knowledge is not a tool for deception, but a divine blueprint for creation. Grail Knight, divine union. He is the embodiment of the lover, but his love is not needy. It's not consumptive hunger of the addict. It is agape, a selfless, unconditional, creative force. He does not seek completion from another. He is in a state of ultimate wholeness and divine union that is the grail that the Grail Knight seeks. God is not a boy in love with his own reflection, Narcissus, nor is he also Narcissus is a Greek myth too, nor is a ghost who flees from life like Peter Pan. He is the ultimate integrated self. He is the ancient, powerful king who has mastered all tools of sovereignty, including his own immense shadow, and has dedicated them entirely to the purpose beyond himself. He is the ultimate symbol of a king whose power has been made whole, not to become a god, but to become a perfect servant of the divine, consecrating his entire being to the service of creation, order, and divine love. In doing so, becoming the force that forges heaven on earth. So, God is psychologically, he is a point to aim at. He's also one of the first things that you can serve that is beyond yourself, that is not serving other people. It's not serving a corporation or an institution or an ideology. Obviously you could argue Christianity is an ideology, but there's lots of religions and there's lots of concepts of God. But God as a whole is an aim point that orientates the psyche towards an axis. And it allows you to reflect. So reading scripture, reading any religion, reading theology, if you do it from an internal perspective of like, what does this tell me about me and how can I understand this to better myself? And how can I align myself to these concepts, to these ideas, to be a better version of myself? God becomes a focal point. And this is really important though. When it comes to possession, you'll see that the arrow comes in here, but it doesn't touch the self. And I haven't covered the self yet, but I will real quick. And then it comes through the self to the Grail Knight. It's really important that there's a disconnection here. And I put this here very specifically because the ego, we haven't talked about the ego and the shadow really, and the self, but let me explain to you what the self is. So the self is the organizing center of totality of the psyche that transcends the ego, quietly regulating psychological balance, meaning, and the drive towards wholeness. It is a regulatory thing in the psyche that moves you towards wholeness. It moves you towards integration. It makes you aware. So like when you become aware of the stupid things that you do or the bad habits that you have and you need to correct them or fix them, that thing that's like doing that is the self. And in contrast to that, we have the ego and the shadow. So I'll cover a little bit about these other things, but technically this is a map of the psyche according to Carl Jung. And we have on the top side, the ego. I'm sure you're familiar with the ego. This is everything you identify with. And this is your consciousness. This is your prefrontal cortex. This is when you say, I am Garen Phillips, I am a YouTuber, I study psychology. That's your ego talking. And your ego loves to hijack. Your ego loves to inflate itself and feel more powerful and stronger and wiser and intelligent than it really is. And if the ego is left unchecked, it will skew and it will gravitate towards certain concepts or ideas. And if you're watching this, you probably identify predominantly with one of these archetypes. But technically, it's your ego that is identifying with that. And that's where the danger starts with this stuff. And this is why there's an inflated axis and a deflated axis of ego or ego inflation, is to counterbalance this stuff. Because if you go too far one way, bad things start to happen in your life. The self is designed to regulate that and bring things back into equilibrium. And one of the reasons that God in this line is disconnected is so that the ego does not attach itself to the concepts of God. So when it comes to studying theology and religion, Christianity or whatever it is, or archetypes, it's very important. The dangers are you start to identify with it. Instead of, and I actually have worked with people like this, and I'm talking to a girl that I'll probably end up dating who built a brand around the goddess archetype. And one of the downsides of that is your ego will often build an identity around that stuff. And this is exactly how branding works, by the way. And every marketer knows this. If you want to have a really good brand, you build a identity or an archetype that's very easy for people to relate to and understand. If you're watching this, you're probably relating to the magician. You're somebody who seeks knowledge and truth. I'm aware of that, and I use that in my marketing, and that's why my color scheme is, like a light gold and green and stuff and sage, because that symbolizes the magician. Everything here visually is magician. Now, when the ego starts to identify unhealthily with one of these archetypes or structures, what's actually occurring is you have the A's right here are archetypes, and then you have C's, which are complexes in the personal unconscious. So technically, ego and persona, personal unconscious, and then you have the shadow, which this is essentially still part of the personal psyche, and we're not going to get into these two, but then you have the self. I actually kind of disagree with this structure a little bit, but I just pulled this photo off to explain some stuff. But in the collective unconscious, you have the archetypes. So the archetypes are eternal. Like, we're going to pass away. We're going to turn to dust one day. But archetypes live on. Like, they're ancient patterns that have emerged through society for tens of thousands of years. But what happens is when somebody starts to study them or embody them or learn from them, is that unconscious complexes in their psyche start to form. So a complex is over here in the legend. The complex is an emotional charge of knots, memories, of affects, and images that operate semi-autonomously and temporarily takes over perception and behavior when activated. So think of a tyrant. Think of a seductress. Think of a benevolent good king. These are all symbols or imagery concepts, but there's a ton of memory and relatedness to those symbols. You can really depict and understand what a lavish prince is just with two words, and it explains a lot. So a complex is the personal thing in your head that can connect to archetypes. And this is usually completely unconscious unless you start to map this stuff out and understand it, which is what I do. And complexes can cause issues. So complexes can also be formed from trauma. So if you've ever studied trauma psychology, or if you know somebody who's suffered through severe trauma, or if you've ever seen somebody who's had a PTSD response, a PTSD response is an activation of a complex. So the trauma people like to throw that word around, but technically the deeper level there is the trauma is not activating through the PTSD response. The complex that is the neurons and the synapses of the mind are firing from an external stimulus that is causing the brain to revert back to a previous time in life. And if you've studied trauma psychology, people's emotions will change, their cortisol levels, their endocrine system will reactivate, their body language will actually like change back to whatever it was when the trauma occurred. And there's a really great book called The Body Keeps Score, which is very long and dense, but it talks about all that stuff. So that's what a complex is. And the danger is, attaching a complex starts to form and wrap itself around an archetype. And the reason that this is dangerous is because the human nervous system is finite, but an archetypical pattern, an archetypical energy is not. It will continue. Like if you embody an archetype too much, it will just continue to demand from you that pattern of behavior until it completely drains you of your life. And you know this, like think about a week. You've probably been in a period of your life where you felt hopeless. You felt weak. You felt like you couldn't do anything. You felt stuck. That unconscious pattern is siphoning your life out of you. And that's what happens when this stuff becomes unconscious or is left unconscious. That's a rundown on this. I was hoping to make this video short and it's not. If you want to learn more about this stuff, there's books here. Subscribe to my channel and Instagram. If you need help with this stuff, I do facilitate, personal, shoot me a DM on Instagram and ask me questions if you're interested in that. Now, the last two things I'll show, we're not going to go through this, but this was the first version that I developed for this stuff. I didn't like it because it's hierarchical and it kind of depicts like an upward movement as a ladder or an ascension, which is good in some ways because it gives you like a roadmap to improve, but unfortunately it like denotes or kind of says like this stuff is bad. And again, I want to point out that the left side of the psyche for the masculine psyche or these archetypes are not bad. You do need to be a prince who wants to prove himself, or a hero who wants to prove himself. A prince also in his divinity is adventurous. He's very adventurous. He wants to go out in the world and he wants to do things. He also creates a fantasy. So Prince of Fantasia, the devil, he works in a world of fantasies. He does not create worlds. He creates illusions. He whispers promises and offers shortcuts. He tempts with fantasies of power without the burden of responsibility. His entire power lies in manipulating the gap between what is and what could be. He is the ruler of the unmanifested. He is an influence, not an action. The devil never forces a hand. He influences choice. He is the ultimate trickster, the great manipulator who promises Narcissus a perfect reflection and Peter Pan an eternal playground. He is the father of the immature shadow. His goal is to prevent integration. The devil is not a moral stance, it's a psychological function. His purpose is to keep the psyche in a state of disintegration, to keep the boy a prince forever, to serve only himself. The suffering of the evil that results are the natural consequences of life lived in service of a disintegrated, self-serving ego. Therefore, so the devil is what occurs in the world when a psyche has skewed really hard one way or the other into these archetypical inflations or deflations. But the prince is fantasy. He lives in fantasy. He doesn't want responsibility, but he has a very clear image of like what he wants. And he probably wants a kingdom and he probably wants a wife and a queen. But this is why they're important, because you have to have that. You have to simultaneously embody the creative, adventurous energy of a prince and a organized sovereign king who is disciplined and does what needs to be done to build the kingdom. You have to have both of them. And if you have only one, you have essentially a Peter Pan or a narcissist. And if you have a king, you essentially have rigidity. If he's just only king, this is somebody who's sterile. He doesn't have any life to him. He's just set in his ways. Like he's old. He's rigid. He doesn't want to change. There's no creativity. There's no vibrancy. There's no life there. Also, if we take the weak axes of all of the selfless service king side, the weakling praying, the apathetic to his divinity, the masochist and the denied innocent one, who has completely lost his power, we get the Fisher King. So the Fisher King in modern culture is best depicted by Theoden in Lord of the Rings in the second movie and the Helm's Deep. So if you haven't seen this, you should. And I nerd the hell out when it comes to Lord of the Rings, and especially on the psychology. So Theoden is originally portrayed as weak. He is possessed by Saruman, and he's lost all of his power, and he's being puppet. And Saruman is essentially... So first off, Gandalf comes and he smites Saruman out of Theoden's body, and that is the self. So Gandalf in Lord of the Rings is the self. He is the regulating center of the psyche. If you look at the entire world of Lord of the Rings as a singular psyche, and everything that is internally battling inside the psyche, Gandalf is the self. He's the regulatory force that doesn't really have a specific aim or identity. He is just there to balance everything and to provide meaning and drive everything forward towards wholeness. I don't know if Tolkien actually studied Jungian psychology, but there's a crazy amount of this stuff in Tolkien's work. And Saruman, when he is manipulating, he is the detached manipulator. He is the sadist. He is the tyrant. And he is also the spiritual warrior. He's just completely twisted by the sovereign, tyrannical king side. And Theoden is the Fisher King, so he has completely lost all of his power. He has lost his ability to think. He's lost his ability to act on the world, which would be the warrior, and he is completely impotent to the Grail Knight and his duty as a man and as a king to his people. And once Gandalf smites him out of there and gets rid of the possession, then he comes back into his fullness as a king. So that's the Fisher King. And if you guys would like a Lord of the Rings breakdown, I after I do Maleficent and a few other movies, I'm probably going to do Lord of the Rings because it's just an awesome fucking series and I love it. And it's going to be, there's a ton of this stuff in Lord of the Rings. Oh, and also, if you want to learn about the Fisher King and the entire psychological evolution and journey spiritually or internally of a young boy, a prince, becoming a fully realized king, study the story of Parsifal and the Fisher King. It's kind of an old story and not a lot of people know about it. It's covered in Iron John, so if you read the book Iron John, he talks about a lot about it. But Parsifal is essentially a prince. He's a divine prince. He's not like sadistic or tyrannical or weak or anything. He's just kind of not fully aware, not fully developed. And his quest is to become a full man. And there's a prophecy that the Fisher King, who is in a castle, is wounded. There's a lot of symbolism between Jesus Christ being stabbed in the ribs and a wound to the groin. Pretty much any depiction of a story of a man being wounded mortally is considered a core wound in Jungian psychology. This is a masculine wound. It's a wound that hits to the core, and it separates and divides the ego, which is I can make an entire video on this because it's quite a long thing. But the story of Parsifal and the Grail and the Fisher King and him being the Grail Knight is to prophesize to save the Fisher King and heal him. But Parsifal fails originally in the first, when he's like 20 or 30 years old, but then he has another chance when he's in his 40s to integrate psychologically. But anyways, if you want to learn any of that stuff, just check out Parsifal and the Fisher King. So that's that. And then this was the original one. I don't like that it's hierarchical, so I moved it this way to show more of a harmonious balance between these. And then originally, this is actually pioneered from a 1991 book called The King, Warrior, Magician, and Lover, which were predecessors of Carl Jung, and they studied Carl Jung and they built this archetype. I didn't like this though, because one, there's no God or devil, and like there's a critical function there psychologically for those concepts. And also the lover was just like really incomplete for me personally. As I was doing my own work and shadow work, I found that like I just really wasn't, it just wasn't connecting and making sense. I understood that it was independent of feminine approval and seeking completion within, but a technically better version of that is just the Grail Knight. So I developed the Grail Knight through this concept. Then lastly, there's a diagnostic here. So if you're a man watching this and you're struggling, you will struggle in one of three ways usually in life. You're either all action, no heart and mind. You're reckless. You're either a brute or a ruthless conqueror, and you need to be less like that. You need to be more thoughtful, a little more strategic, a little more logical, a little more magician, and think through things and have a strategy and plan, or you're completely disconnected from relationships and Eros and femininity, and you're just a fucking brute. And on the extreme sides, if you get like if you get an extreme magician who is also very warrior and tactical and can go out and take action, you get a ruthless strategist. And then if you get somebody who's all mind and no action or heart, you get a soulless technician, somebody who understands everything but is completely disconnected and depressed with their life. If you're somebody who's very spiritually inclined, or you feel like you're very aware and psychologically developed, but you are nihilistic, or there's just, it seems dark or bland, it's because you have no heart. You haven't connected to Eros and femininity and relationships. So you need to be less in your mind, and you need to take more action, and you need to make more relationships. Now, in the middle, if you have somebody who takes no action, but they are, some heart and a lot of mind, you get a philosopher. You get somebody who talks about stuff all the time, but never does anything with it. And all heart and spirit, but no action and mind. You have a grail knight. They're an ineffective mystic. They're a bleeding heart. They're like all emotion. They're all connected. They have relationships and everything. But man, making a plan and like taking action towards that plan and building a future or a kingdom, fuck that. I just want to live in the relationships. That's one of those guys. So you basically want to balance the psyche. You want to move it towards, you need to do things and map yourself and understand what's going on so that you can orientate yourself in the center. So you have a plan, you have built relationships around that plan, and that plan is serving relationship function in Eros, and you're now taking action towards that plan. Quick little diagnostic tool there. So that is the masculine psyche in a quick 45-minute video. I'm still working on the feminine psyches, but I'm not a chick, so I'm building it through my own work with other women. And I'll continue to build out like this stuff. There'll be more and more stuff here as it goes on. And I'll be doing a lot of videos breaking down mythological stories and all this stuff too. So hope you enjoyed this. And if you have questions, shoot them on Instagram in my DMs, and I will answer them for you and help you out in any way I can.